I'm Lise Avery of Anything Goes Syndicated Radio. I'm sitting here with Alan Pepper, the co-owner of the legendary nightclub The Bottom Line in New York City for a lot of years.
30 years.
30 years. And the series producer of the Bottom Line Archives series of recordings, Greg Bendian. Thanks so much for being here with me, you guys. And tell me a little bit, what makes the Bottom Line legendary nightclub in New York City?
Well, the Bottom Line had run for 30 years. In fact, it closed 3 weeks short of its last, of its 30th anniversary. And the scope of the talent presented, we had a very eclectic approach to music. So everyone from Bruce Springsteen to Dolly Parton to Willie Nelson to Sonny Rollins to Dexter Gordon to Charles Mingus. And one of the things I'm most proud of, Aaron Copland performed on the stage of the Bottom Line.
Wow.
And so it actually, I think, became iconic to a lot of people because it was the place that's really credited with pushing Bruce Springsteen really into the limelight. He played this series of engagements at the Bottom Line in 1975, which was the Born to Run tour. And out of that, he got the cover of Time and Newsweek simultaneously, which is something that few people had done. And that show was broadcast on NEW, and that engagement is really credited with helping to really break his career. In fact, there's no book, to my knowledge, that's been written about Springsteen that doesn't mention the Bottom Line engagement. And one of the things that I found out recently, which really surprised me, there was a book that came out which is called Bruce, and in the book, it talks about Robert De Niro coming to see Springsteen, and that I remember, coming to see Springsteen. And Bruce had this thing at the end of his set to get the audience revved up, and to get an encore, he'd say to the audience, "You talking to me?" And so the audience would, respond, and he'd say, "I can't hear you. You talking to me?" And of course the audience would respond. And De Niro lifted that for Taxi Driver. He was in the audience and he gave it to the character in the
Come
thing.
on.
And I was blown away by that. So I guess we contributed to pop culture, not only in helping to expose Springsteen to a larger audience, but we also, in a strange way, helped a major iconic movie called Taxi Driver. Or Bruce did. We just provided the stage for it.
There's an awful lot of stories about the Bottom Line, and I'd love to get into all of them, but I'd like to know, how do you guys know each other?
Can I start?
Please.
And then you can. Okay.
Why are we here together?
Greg Bendian, who's become a very dear friend of mine, used to come to the Bottom Line as a kid with his dad. His dad had very broad musical taste. So Greg was a teenager and used to come to the club to see all kinds of shows. In fact, to this day, I'm amazed when he and I talk and he'd say, "Oh yeah, I saw that show," or "I know that show." And then years later, Greg is a musician. He's a drummer. He's a percussionist and a drummer, and an arranger and a composer. And so years later, he approached me about his band called the Mahavishnu Project to play at the Bottom Line. And I booked the band, and Greg started to play at the club. And then when the club closed, he stayed in touch with me. And I had this really treasure trove of recordings that had been recorded at the Bottom Line. And I explored the possibility of putting out a box set of recordings, and I asked Greg if he would come on board and be the producer of this. But I will say something to you that I've only mentioned to you once before. This Greg came to the club a lot. He came with his dad. And the one time when Greg was performing at the club, I saw this guy sitting at a table with a video camera. And I went over to him and I said, "You can't do that. You can't and I said, "Shut it down." And the guy said, "Yeah, but I said, "Shut it down. You can't video." And it was Greg's dad, which I think I apologized to him for.
Yeah, you did.
But so all right, so that's how we met, and that's the deal.
And what was it like for you, Greg, to find yourself playing a gig at the Bottom Line after going there all those years with your dad?
It was fame and fortune, you know, it was success. It was the definition of playing the venue in New York. I knew that Alan would welcome what we were doing because he was so ensconced in every style of music. There were no barriers at the club. So when we started playing there, and then eventually when we got comfortable playing there, it just felt so much like home base, and it felt like everything we did there was okay, it was acceptable. So we would work in original music into the Mahavishnu sets, and that was okay. And you'd go back and get Alan and would pay you, and we'd have a talk. And so few venues ever had a guy who ran the club and would say, "Hey, you guys sounded really good tonight." Like he knew if we had a good show or not because he actually came out and listened. He didn't just sit in the office. So I immediately got the vibe that, oh, he's a music guy, he's not a business guy.
That makes all the difference when you're a musician.
And it's rare.
Yeah.
It's rare in the music business, especially when things started changing in the late 70s into the 80s and it became a business. And so I could spot a music guy a mile away because they were so few and far between. So Alan was the bridge between the music business and real music.
Stanley and I.
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
So because you're speaking about he was not a business guy, he was a music guy. So
Yeah.
that's why I wanted to ask about Stanley Snedowski.
Right.
Now, you ran the club with your wife Eileen,
Right.
right? And Stanley, who was the business guy, right?
Stanley and I were friends since we were about 10 or 11 years old. So we grew up together and we became business partners. And we were two sides of a coin. He was very rational and calculating and had an amazing sense of business, one of the smartest people I've ever met. And I was the one with the passion and flying by the seat of my pants. We liked different kinds of music. We went through a period of time where he loved folk music, and he could listen to records that he loved over and over and over again. And I didn't basically have that kind of patience. I wanted to hear more and more of different, of different stuff. And I love jazz. I became very involved with jazz. So, and I absolutely loved it. And we formed an organization called Jazz Interactions, which was a nonprofit accepting corporation that allowed the mission of this organization, which was a nonprofit, and the mission was to try and educate people to the art form of jazz as the only pure American art form that actually developed in this country. And so to do that, we started setting up these jazz jam sessions where we would hire musicians to play. And I was a kid, I was at home, and my mother would say, "There's this guy on the phone to talk to, I think his name is Freddie Hubbard." My heart would stop. I'd say, "Freddie Hubbard is calling to talk to me? Oh my God." And he was talking to me, he was calling me to get a gig at these, we paid very little. We paid $38 to the leader and I think $25 for the sideman, and it was three sets. And we do it in some club, and the whole notion was just to keep people working. I very quickly realized that if you controlled employment, you had power. I mean, when, one time I came out and I said, I came home and my mom said, "Any calls?" She said, "This guy Rassan something, Rassan." I said, "Rassan Roland Kirk?" And she said, "Yeah, I think that was his name." I said, "Oh my God." And okay, so I convinced Stanley. I said, "We have to open up a club." And he looked at me like, "What, are you insane?" And I said, "No, it'll be great. We'll break into the music business. It'll be fabulous." So Stanley and I formed a business relationship, and we went on to open the Bottom Line. He was an attorney, and somebody when we were running the club, the people used to refer to us as the Doberman and the Curious Cocker Spaniel. And I'll let you guess who was who. But he and I had a wonderful run together. He passed away a couple of years ago, and we were the closest of friends. I've never met anybody smarter. He had an ability to look at a situation and be able to know what the core was instantly. He was also a phenomenal negotiator. And I always said, if you got into an argument with Stanley, if you accepted his first premise, it was over. In other words, when I would fight with him, I would never accept as a given the first thing he would say, because he had such a logical mind. He could take you wherever he wanted to take you. So I always knew that once you accepted his first premise, game over.
And so you and Stanley had the Bottom Line from what year to what year?
We opened February 12th, 1974, and we closed 2004. January 22nd, bittersweet. We closed on the birthday of my twin daughters. That's the day we closed.
And for those who aren't familiar with the location, which was also iconic.
In the Village, it was 15 West 4th Street, West 4th and Mercer.
And you referenced earlier when we were off camera that Greg is going to be the keeper of the flame of the Bottom Line archives. Can you explain
Well, he didn't
that?
know that. I just told him, so that's an exclusive for you. Greg, among everybody I met, he treasures he treasures and knows the value and worth of what we did and what we were able to accomplish. And he knows what all the tapes are worth historically and culturally. And he also knows what all the memorabilia, all the contracts, all the pictures, all the stuff that we have. And he feels very much the same way that I do about it. And so I feel very good. I know he knows the worth of what it is that is there. So there's nobody I feel more comfortable with, in terms of this material than him. And so basically, whether he likes it or not, he's going to have to take care of it. I won't be here forever.
Well, we started the process last year. I've been teaching at William Patterson for the last few years. I teach music production and arranging and composition. And we got some interns from William Patterson to come to Alan's house and organize the archive.
Wow.
And that was a big job. It took about a year. But we had one guy in particular was really helpful with that, John Garum. And he put everything into a database. So we now have every tape in every format listed by date in a master archive list. And that has enabled us to get a lot of companies and a lot of different people interested in what exists there. And it's over 1,000 pieces.
Over 1,000 performances.
That's
Now,
amazing.
it's not 1,000 different musicians because we have late shows and early shows. We always did 2 shows. Most of the times we did 2 shows. So, but sometimes on a late show you have somebody incredible who just comes in and sits in. I think Dave Mason was performing and Stevie Winwood sat in. Carl Perkins was performing and Eric Clapton came and played with him. So you get, you by virtue of having 2 performances, you get the best ones. And it allows Greg to take the best of an early show and the best of a late show and put them together seamlessly.
Okay. Now, you guys are going to be releasing some of these performances initially as CDs, right? Not DVDs yet?
CDs.
CDs. And so the first 3 are going to be?
The first 3 are Brecker Brothers from 1976. Willie Nile from 1980 and 2000. So it's a double disc release. And Kenny Rankin from 1990, which was originally released in the late 90s on Bottom Line Records, but now we've remastered it and done extensive historical liner notes for the the disc, and that's the 25th anniversary of that concert this year.
Okay.
Let me just say, there was a Bottom Line Records that was in the late '90s, and there were 11 titles put out.
I remember.
Of the 11 titles, 5 of them were part of this thing called the Encore Collection, which were these live performances done at the Bottom Line, which Greg makes reference to remastering, where those 5 will be remastered, as well as 2 volumes that were put out by Razor and Tie called In Their Own Words, which are a compilation of these moments from the songwriter shows that we used to do. But Greg has now actually gone into the vaults, and with the Brecker brothers and with Willie have found things that have never been released, and he's worked on it. We're fortunate in that the guy who really is responsible for getting this whole thing happening is a guy by the name of Bob Frank, who ran Koch Entertainment and was very, very aware of the Bottom Line, very much a part of it, because when there were Bottom Line Records, it was distributed at one point by Koch. And Bob had always had a passion about, he knew what the club was, and he knew what. So he, as an executive, has been somebody who has been very committed to doing what Greg and I have been doing, like artistically. He's been making the thing. What a lot of people might not realize is that, when the Bottom Line closed, I got like emails from a gazillion people that said, oh, you have these great recordings, you should put them out, that way you can make more money. What people don't realize is it's not that easy to take something and turn it around, because there were like a lot of rights issues.
Right.
And you can't just go and put something out that was recorded years ago without getting the rights cleared. There are publishing rights that have to be cleared. There are performance rights that have to be cleared. If an artist was with a record company, there are those legalities that have to be cleared. And Bob has taken on the whole business end of it through his company, and he's actually made it possible for Greg and I to be able to go in and do the artistic things that that we've been able to do. And the other thing is, we've been lucky enough to do this work at a place in the Village called the Magic Shop. And why I say we've been lucky, because these guys specialize in restoration of old material. Again, what the public doesn't realize is you could be talking about a tape that was recorded in Brecker Brothers 1976. Brecker Brothers 1976. Well, and Greg can address himself to this. There's a whole process that you just don't take a tape and transfer it. There's a whole process that has to happen. And we've been fortunate in the sense that this studio really specializes and he's been working with an amazingly talented woman as an engineer.
Jessica Thompson.
And the guy who owns the place, Steve Rosenthal, is a very big supporter. Why don't you talk about how this stuff is put together?
Well, they're set up for this, uniquely set up for this at the Magic Shop. So when there's archival recordings, say, of Woody Guthrie, which were recorded just on a wire in the nascent recording industry that Edison had created. You have Steve figuring out the tools of how to transfer that to the digital world. So it's not, nothing is just put it in the machine and transfer it. The DAT tapes that we all remember, those some of the first convenient digital tapes, are terrible mechanically over time. So they have to be repaired, they have to be put into a special machine that Steve developed. So he's developed special technology that enables us to get this stuff from point A to release. And the old reel-to-reels have to be baked so that the metallic fragments that include the information of the music get back onto the physical tape. Otherwise, when you're playing them, you see the stuff just shredding off of the tape. It's disturbing. But knowing that they know exactly how to bake it for how long and then transfer it, and we get a good transfer. Sometimes they have to go back and bake it a second time because the transfer is problematic. But they know all the ins and outs and what have yous of how to make archival stuff sound as good as it can sound. So what we have is a really good sounding archive. We have cassettes that sound good, we have reel-to-reels that sound good, we have DATs that sound good. And that's what's exciting about it too is, and Alan didn't really particularly house this stuff in a very careful way, so we've gotten lucky in that the stuff has held up very well. So we're looking forward to releasing as much of it as we can because it represents a time in music where creativity and individuality and not sounding like the other guy was the rule of thumb. And in that light, kind of dealing with the current music scene where everybody's trying to sound like something that is recognizable and there's very little adventure. So it harkens back to a time of really live creativity and a range of musical styles that don't necessarily exist anymore either. So we have 30 years of stuff that represents, I think, the height of the music recording industry.
So we spoke briefly about your wife, Eileen.
Right.
And so how did she participate in the running of the Bottom Line?
Eileen and I have, besides being married for 47 years and being together another 3 on top of that, so we've known each other for 50 years. She's got the greatest taste in music in my world of anybody I've come in contact with. She's got great ears. She's a musician. She plays piano and she plays guitar. So she listens differently than I do because I'm not a musician. I mean, we could both be listening to a record or a CD and I'll really love a particular song and she'll look at it and say, I love those chords. And I don't know what she's talking about. I mean, I know, but I don't know. So on many occasions, I'd always share with her, I'd always share with her my ideas of what I was thinking of, and I'd always love the feedback that she gave me. In fact, I will tell you 2 quick stories. I always programmed the Bottom Line. I always programmed it in terms of things that I would be interested in coming to see a show, like what would interest me. And you can't always be successful there because obviously you have to pay bills. But I come up with a lot of concepts and I think, this could be neat. And she was the one that actually influenced me to start booking a lot of country music. And the reason was that we were going through a period of time where I personally was getting bored with the stuff that I was booking myself. In other words, it wasn't speaking to me in the same way. But again, you still have to pay bills. And she was getting bored with what she was listening to on the radio. So she basically found country music and started to really get into country music. And so she started to share that with me. And this was, I guess, in the 80s. And I got very turned on. First of all, I love country writing. Like in terms of, I love the little stories. And so I became very interested in country and then wanting to start to present country at the Bottom Line. That came from her. That came from just, and I will tell you one other story. I will tell you 2 stories, but these are very
What country
famous.
artists performed at the Bottom Line? You mentioned Dolly Parton at one point.
Willie Nelson, Dolly Parton,
Waylon
Jennings,
Okay.
Chris Christopherson,
Delbert McClinton,
Lynn Anderson, Ronnie Millsap,
Emmylou
Harris. Tom T. Home, one of my favorites. George Jones. The 3rd time I booked him, the first 2 we didn't show. George Jones. But the bonus was anybody who came got to see Bonnie Raitt and Linda Ronstadt get up on the stage and sing background with him.
Yeah.
So Marty Stewart, I love Marty Stewart. So I booked a lot of country artists that really came from her. Okay, So I came up with this idea one day, right around the Academy Awards. And the idea was to do a show and with songs that were never nominated for Academy Awards, that people might have thought won Academy Awards, and the show was called And the Winner Is. So I got like really excited. I was at the club, I called her, I said, I need to share this idea with you. And it was around lunchtime, and I started talking to her, and I hear her say, Stacy, don't do that. Bonnie, stop that. We have 4 kids. Gordon, will you stop torturing your sisters? So she said, you know, I know this is a bad time. This is a really bad time. Could you call me later? I said, fine. Call her later. I'm all excited to share this news. So listen, so I got this idea, the Academy, and then I hear her say, you got to do your homework now. Will you stop doing that? Turn off the TV. And she said, I can't talk. Let's talk later. Now I'm home. We're both in bed. This is
Kids are asleep, hopefully.
kids are asleep. We're in bed. And I said, I need to share this idea with you. And she said, okay. So I said, all right, so here's the idea. We're going to do a show of songs that were written, you know, and were nominated for Academy Awards and never won. And I said, I'm going to get David Amram. I'm going to get this big, lush orchestra. We're going to do great arrangements with it. And it's, you know, I'm really excited. Maybe we'll show some film clips. Maybe we'll have a narrator of it. And I said, so what do you think? Pause. And she says, you didn't mention singers. I said, well, I wasn't thinking of singers. I was thinking of David Amram. And she said, you're going to do a show about songs that were nominated and you have no singers? And I said, well, I wasn't thinking of that. I was thinking of David Amram. And she said to me, you're going to lose your shirt. And she turns over and takes the covers with her. So now I'm lying there, sans covers, lying there. And she says, good night. And from that, I got Patti LuPone, Robert Kraft, and Ken Page to do an evening of songs called And the Winner Is. And that just came from that thing. And then the last thing I will tell you is that she's a bundle of ideas and energy. She sings, she plays guitar, she's very musical. Anytime I tell her about a show, she'd always say, well, I could do that. I could come down. And it was like Rookie and Lucy. No, Lucy, you can't come down to the club tonight. No. And we did the Downtown Messiah. And I came home, which was this big version of Handel's Messiah. And I came home and I said, I have a gift for you. And she said, what is that? And I said, you should be in the chorus of the, you know. And she looked at me, she said, are you kidding? And I said, no, you should really do this. And she said, I'm not sure. And I said, what are you talking about you're not sure? Like, for 30 years you've been telling me what are you talking about? And she said, I don't want it to be like people thinking the boss's wife, I'm singing. And I said, Eileen, you read music. You cite that you teach music. And I said, it's going to have nothing to do with me. I said, like, in 30 seconds, you're going to prove that it's got nothing to do with the boss. And she did it, and she said it was the best gift I ever gave her, and she did it for 7 years. So that's the story of Eileen and the Bottom Line.